It wasn't supposed to happen. Not that night. Not between them. But when fire meets fire, there's no turning back. Some stories aren't written in ink. They're written in silence, in shadows, in the kind of heat that burns everything it touches. And when it's over, you're left pretending it never happened. Even though every part of you remembers, the night was heavy with secrets. The city lights flickered like a heartbeat, and somewhere in that rhythm, two souls collided. She moved through the room like a storm dressed in velvet, quiet but powerful, every glance commanding attention. He wasn't supposed to notice. He had promised himself he wouldn't. But the moment her eyes found his, everything else disappeared. There was no music loud enough to drown the pull between them. Every breath felt like a question waiting to be answered. The air was thick, not with smoke or perfume, but with something unspoken, something dangerous. He told himself it was just another night, another face, another fleeting moment. But deep down, he knew this was different. The way she smiled wasn't soft. It was sharp, like a secret weapon. It said, "I see you." It said, "I know what you're hiding." And maybe that's what scared him the most, the feeling of being seen when he had spent his life hiding behind power, money, and rules. He took a sip of his drink, trying to ground himself. The ice clinked, slow and steady, like the ticking of a clock counting down to disaster. Around them, laughter echoed, music pulsed, but it all faded into a blur. Time seemed to slow down as if the world itself was holding its breath. There was a crown on the table, golden, untouched, a reminder of everything that stood between them. It wasn't just a symbol of power. It was a warning. But warnings are useless when temptation feels this real. She leaned closer, close enough for him to feel the warmth of her breath. No words, no promises, just silence. And in that silence, something began. Something small, fragile, and forbidden. He could smell the faint trace of her perfume, sweet, yet sharp, like a flame dressed in silk. It lingered in the air long after she walked away. He didn't follow, not right away. But his eyes did. They followed her through the crowd, past the lights, through the haze of smoke curling up from expensive cigars. It wasn't attraction anymore. It was gravity. And there's no fighting gravity, not when it's pulling you straight into the fire. That night, something shifted. It wasn't love. It wasn't even lust. It was something in between, the dangerous kind of want that feels like fate wearing a disguise. Every step she took drew him closer to the edge, and for the first time in years, he didn't care about falling. He told himself it was just a spark, harmless, fleeting, easy to forget. But sparks have a way of becoming flames. And flames have a way of consuming everything. The air between them changed. It wasn't just warm anymore. It was alive, trembling with the kind of energy that can't be named. Every glance became a secret message. Every second stretched longer than it should. The night had grown quieter, but their silence was louder than any song. She didn't have to say a word. The way she looked at him said everything. It was a challenge, a dare, a whisper that said, "Come closer." If you're brave enough. He wasn't brave. He was curious. And curiosity is the first step toward ruin. She stood near the balcony, her back to him, city lights wrapping her figure in gold. He watched her reflection in the glass, a queen without a throne, a flame without fear. The wind played with her hair, and for a moment she looked untouchable. But he couldn't stop himself. The space between them vanished as if the world itself had pulled them together. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than he intended. "You know this is wrong," he said, almost as if he wanted her to agree, to give him a reason to walk away. But she only smiled, her eyes burning brighter than the lights outside. "Then stop me," she whispered. He didn't, he couldn't, because deep inside, he didn't want to. There was something about her that felt like danger disguised as desire. Her presence was heat and ice at the same time, the kind that made him feel alive after years of being numb. Every inch of space between them screamed with the tension of everything they weren't supposed to feel. He had fought harder battles before, but never against himself, Her fingers brushed against his hand, barely a touch, but it felt like lightning. His breath caught. The world narrowed down to that single moment, her skin against his, the pulse in his chest, the rhythm of her breathing. Time didn't matter anymore. Rules didn't matter. All that mattered was the fire that was spreading quietly, dangerously between them. She turned to face him. Their eyes met, not softly, but like two storms colliding. He could see the reflection of the city lights in her pupils, and somewhere in that glow, he saw everything he shouldn't want. She leaned in, close enough for him to feel her heartbeat, and said, "If this never happened, why does it feel so real?" Her words were smoke, disappearing even as they burned through him. He wanted to step back, to remind himself who he was, what he stood for. But his feet wouldn't move. Every thought that tried to stop him melted under the weight of the moment. He reached out, slowly, uncertainly, and the distance between them vanished. When they kissed, it wasn't gentle. It was chaos, wild, raw, full of everything they'd tried to suppress. It felt like the world had been waiting for this one wrong thing to happen. And when it did, it felt right. Too right. Outside, thunder rolled. The first drops of rain began to fall, tapping softly against the windows like an audience holding its breath. The city lights blurred, and inside, the fire only grew stronger. The room around them faded, walls, ceilings, time gone. All that remained was the heat, the sound of their hearts, and the knowing that once this fire started, it would never go out. Hours slipped away unnoticed. When he finally pulled back, her eyes held a question, not of regret, but of what comes next. He didn't have an answer. He knew only one thing. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And yet, as she turned away, the faint trace of her smile said it all. She wasn't afraid. She was fire itself, and he had just chosen to burn. The scent of smoke lingered in the air, soft but unshakable. It clung to his clothes, to his thoughts, to his soul. He tried to convince himself that it was nothing, a moment, a mistake, a memory that would fade by morning. But deep down, he knew. Some fires don't burn out. They burn within. He looked at the glass of whiskey still sitting on the table and touched melted ice swirling like time itself had given up. The crown was still there too, gleaming faintly under the dim light. It seemed to mock him now, a symbol of everything he had risked for something that could never exist. He whispered her name once, softly, as if saying it too loudly would make it more real. Then he looked at his reflection in the window, not the powerful man everyone saw, but a man undone by something simple, human, and forbidden. The night had started with a spark. Now it was ablaze. And somewhere in the distance, under the sound of rain and thunder, a voice in his mind said the words he would repeat for years. This never happened. Morning didn't arrive gently. It broke through the window like judgment, spilling harsh light over everything that was supposed to stay hidden. The air still carried the faint scent of her perfume, faint but stubborn, refusing to fade. The sheets were tangled. The room was quiet. And he could feel the weight of what they had done pressing down on his chest like a secret too heavy to carry. He sat at the edge of the bed, hands clasped, staring at the floor. The city outside was already awake, unaware that his world had shifted overnight. He wanted to pretend it hadn't happened, to believe it was just another night blurred by smoke and whiskey. But every mark on his skin, every breath that still tasted like her, told him otherwise. The fire that once burned bright now smoldered in silence, leaving only ashes, proof that something had lived here. Even if it shouldn't have done, she moved behind him. Quiet, graceful, as if the world hadn't just tilted off its axis. There was no trace of guilt on her face, only calm acceptance. She buttoned her blouse slowly, the click of each button sounding like a countdown back to reality. He wanted to say something, to ask what this meant, to ask if she felt the same storm still raging inside him. But the words never came, because deep down he already knew the answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, but sharp enough to cut through the silence. "You look like a man who wants to forget," she said, and there was no judgment in her tone, only truth. He looked up at her, searching for something, maybe regret, maybe mercy. but found only fire. Not the wild flame from the night before, but something colder, more dangerous. The kind of fire that doesn't need heat to destroy. This never happened, she said simply, for words that sealed their fate. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a plea. It was a command. He nodded, because what else was there to do? The crown still sat on the table, silent, mocking, untouched. He reached for it but stopped midway. It no longer looked like power. It looked like a cage, a reminder that he was never really free, not even in his moments of rebellion. As she walked to the door, he caught a glimpse of her reflection in the mirror, the same woman, but different now. The kind of different that only comes after you've crossed a line you swore you'd never approach. She paused, hand on the handle, and turned just enough for him to see the shadow of a smile. Fire doesn't apologize, she said, and then she was gone. The door closed softly behind her, but the echo of her words stayed. It filled the room like smoke, impossible to breathe, impossible to escape. He stood there for a long time, staring at the space she had occupied, the silence growing heavier by the second. The world outside moved on, cars honked, people hurried. Life continued, but inside, time had stopped. He walked to the window and looked out at the city. It looked the same as always, alive, careless, endless. But for him, everything had changed. The lights that once felt alive now looked distant and cold. The rain from the night before had washed the streets clean, but it hadn't washed away what they'd done. Some stains, he realized, are made of memory, not dirt. He pressed a hand against the glass, watching his reflection blur against the skyline. He didn't recognize the man staring back. There was something hollow in his eyes, something burned away. The price of the fire, he thought, was always too high, but it's a lesson you only learn once you've been burned. He turned back to the room, the bed, the crown, the faint lipstick stain on his collar. Ghosts of a night that shouldn't have existed. He reached for the whiskey glass again, but this time, he drank it in one motion. It didn't help. The burn of the alcohol was nothing compared to the burn inside Dot as he sat in silence. The memory replayed itself, the touch, the heat, the words, the promise of forgetting. But forgetting isn't the opposite of remembering. It's the act of pretending. And he knew, no matter how many times he repeated those 4 words, this never happened. It always would. By noon, the city's hum had drowned out his thoughts. The phone buzzed with messages, meetings, obligations, life demanding he play his part again. He straightened his tie, fixed his expression, and stood tall. To everyone else, he was still the same man, powerful, composed, untouchable. But inside, he was smoke. As he left the room, he glanced back one last time. The sunlight caught the edge of the crown, making it gleam like fire. For a moment, he thought he saw her silhouette in the reflection, just watching. But when he blinked, it was gone. And just like that, the story ended where it began, in silence. No proof, no trace, no witnesses. Only ashes. Only memory. Only the quiet truth between 2 people who would carry the same secret until it burned itself out. Because some fires don't end when the night does. They follow you, invisible, eternal, whispering through the smoke. This never happened. Days passed, but time no longer felt real. It moved without meaning, morning blending into night, night into something darker. He went through the motions like an actor trapped in a scene he no longer believed in. The meetings, the handshakes, the polite smiles, they were all lines from a script he couldn't rewrite. Yet behind his steady gaze, the fire still flickered, quiet but alive, waiting for air. Everywhere he went, he saw her ghost. Not the kind that haunts halls or whispers in the dark, but the kind that hides in flashes, a scent in the air, a laugh across a room, the faint echo of heels against marble. She had become a presence in absence, a memory he couldn't bury no matter how deep he tried to dig. He told himself it was over, that she was gone. But some people don't leave. They linger in thought, in dream, in the softest corners of your mind. He sat by the window most nights, watching the city glow beneath him. Power still belonged to him, the title, the empire, the crown, but it felt weightless now, almost meaningless. What use was power if it couldn't control the heart? The very thing that had made him untouchable had now become his weakness. He had faced enemies, betrayal, loss, but never himself. Never this kind of emptiness. The world saw a man at the top, but inside he was standing in the ruins of what could never be. Every victory felt hollow. Every applause echoed like a funeral bell. And when he closed his eyes, he didn't see his empire, he saw her. The way she said those words, calm, final, cruel in their truth. This never happened, but it had happened in every heartbeat that refused to slow. In every dream that replayed their night like a broken record. It lived in the tension between denial and desire, in the quiet torment of knowing something so real could never be spoken aloud. He carried that night like a secret scar, invisible to everyone else, but always burning beneath the surface. Weeks turned into months. He tried to rebuild the walls he had set ablaze. He smiled at the right moments, played his part, gave speeches that sounded convincing. But every now and then, his voice would falter, just slightly, when he caught the scent of smoke in the air. It wasn't there, not really, but his mind refused to let it go. The memory had become its own kind of ghost, patient, persistent, cruel. One evening, he found himself standing in the same room where it all began. The lights were softer now, the air colder. The crown still rested on the table, polished, untouched. He stared at it for a long time, remembering how easily he had forgotten its weight that night, how quickly he had traded control for chaos. He reached for it again, this time not to claim it, but to understand it. And for the first time, it didn't look like a symbol of power. It looked like punishment. He turned the crown in his hands, the gold catching the fading light. In its reflection, he saw not a king, not a conqueror, but a man who had loved something he was never meant to have. A man who learned to light that fire always demands something in return. He thought of her again, where she might be, what she might be doing. Maybe she had forgotten. Maybe she had already burned a dozen other hearts since his. But maybe, just maybe, when the nights grew quiet and the city fell asleep, she felt it too, that lingering ache of something they couldn't name. Sometimes he thought about calling her, just once, to hear her voice, to know if she remembered. But every time, he stopped himself. Because what would he even say? I can't forget what never happened. Some truths are better left unspoken. Some fires are better left to die on their own. He placed the crown back on the table and stepped away. The room felt smaller now, filled with ghosts of laughter and promises that never existed. He walked to the balcony, the night air cold against his skin. The city stretched below him, alive, bright, endless, but for the first time, it didn't tempt him. It didn't belong to him anymore. He looked up at the sky. No stars, only clouds. The faint scent of rain hung in the air, the kind of rain that promises to wash everything clean, but never really does. He closed his eyes and whispered, not to her, not to himself, but to the memory that refused to fade. This never happened, but this time it didn't sound like denial. It sounded like goodbye. The wind rose, carrying his words into the distance, scattering them into the night. Somewhere out there, maybe she felt it, a chill, a whisper, an echo of a story neither of them would ever tell. The fire was gone now, but its warmth remained. Not in his hands, not in his heart, but in the quiet understanding that some things are meant to exist only once. Some moments are too fragile, too dangerous, too beautiful to survive the light of day. He turned away from the balcony, the city still humming below, and walked into the dark. The camera would fade there, not with flames, but with embers glowing softly, silently, before disappearing completely. Because in the end, the greatest stories aren't the ones we tell. They're the ones we never speak of. And this one never happened.